Okay. Hello, everyone. My name is XP Lee, and welcome to my XP and Friends podcast. I have a super wonderful, awesome person with me today. She is Susan Brower, our Minnesota State demographer, and I have the I had the awesome pleasure of working with her, getting to know her, and working with her during the 2020 census response. And you know, it was such a powerful moment, not only in my like career but also in my life, and it really helped to change like the dynamic of like my understanding of like the our democratic process. Right? It was really truly that powerful, and we'll talk a little bit about how it kind of, well, I mean, it definitely paid off, but how it did so in such a wonderful way. So you may not have known about it, but we'll talk about the number 26 a little bit later. But wanted to just thank you all for joining. It's awesome. Looks like we have, a few people with us already. If you do have any questions, definitely feel free to put them down in the live comments. But with that, let me turn it over to Susan. Susan, please introduce yourself. Tell a little bit about, what you do, and the office of your office, and what your office does as well.
Sure. Thanks, XP. Yes, it was great to work with you during the census campaign, and I hope you will help me tell that story too, because there was just so much to tell that some of it falls out of my brain. There was so much going on, and I'm still actually finding out now things that happened during the census campaign and different efforts that were going on that I didn't even know about until, a year later. So anyway, to the point, the State Demographic Center is part of state government. We're a small office in the Department of Administration. So there's just 4 of us in the office. There are 3 demographers and 1 program person. And during most of the decade, our job is to analyze trends, create population estimates, which is how many people live in each city and township across the state. Except for the 7-county area. The Met Council does that, but we do everything outside of the 7-county area. We make population projections for the whole state so that different communities can plan. And then we do a whole lot of public speaking, analysis of special trends, special reports. And essentially, we're just looking to see how the state is changing demographically and what impacts those have on our communities, on our economy. We look at rural population changes, so kind of a whole range of data about who lives in Minnesota and how it's changing. Yeah, so that's most of the time, most of the decade. But around census time, we get really involved in doing both census education and engagement. So that's where you and I met. XP is doing that census engagement work. This is my first census, so I was just as a state demographer. So I was just learning kind of the ropes with everyone else as we kind of figured out what we were doing as we did it, and it worked out pretty well. I'm sure there's things that we can do better, but there was a lot of energy and effort around that. So our office was responsible for really organizing mostly government people around the census, and then other groups that we partnered with helped organize nonprofit organizations and philanthropic groups and the business community, but we really focused on government, local government and state government response to the census.
Yeah, and it was like really really great. I mean, I remember the intersectionality, right? Intersectorality, I guess. I don't know if that's a word, but I mean, it was, government, it was philanthropy, it was nonprofit, it was private, organizations. Really, it was a great coming together here in Minnesota of resources, and that's one of the things that definitely like impressed on me just the importance of being able to work, across, all those sectors. And you and the rest of your crew who you were able to recruit, obviously, Andrew and David and the others, and there was a couple, like, I think, interns, but they all were super wonderful to work with. So definitely looking forward to the future again, in terms of working on that. I've had my own thoughts, and maybe we'll talk a little bit about 2030. Oh my gosh, it's hard to imagine, but 2030, and what we can do later
I
on.
should have mentioned, thank you for reminding me too. It was all such a blur, but we actually, our small office, which is now 4, ballooned to almost 8. So
Yeah.
yes. So some of those people you mentioned were fabulous. And yeah, we had a lot of help both in our office and outside of our office.
Yes. So, the origin story of the Minnesota Census Mobilization Partnership, I don't think I've actually heard it from your perspective. Maybe you've mentioned it a little bit, and, it kind of goes, that Joan connected with Bob, connected, with you. And that was, back in like 2015, 2016-ish, right? So, um, you know, again, like the census, Minnesota overall, we did such a wonderful job, and it all kind of came from those conversations, in terms of how the Minnesota Census, Mobilization Partnership was able to come together to help your office and to help others. So, so from your perspective, like, what were your thoughts? Like, who are these people, and what do they want to talk about? And okay, yeah, that sounds great. So yeah, tell a little bit about that origin story from your perspective.
Sure. So, most of the people that we intersect with on any given day are people who are data users. And so I'm used to talking to planners and statisticians and academics, about what data are out there about the people of Minnesota. So those are kind of the people I'm used to talking with. So Bob Tracy came along from the Minnesota Council on Foundations, and he wanted to meet with me and have a conversation about what we were planning for census outreach. In the past, the census outreach had been focused in part in our office, that we had a pretty big presence. I wasn't there at the time, but the state demographer's office played this role in the past. And Bob Tracy from MCF said, we think this is really important. We really think that it is something that is important, not just, for whatever government purposes, but just for the foundations of our democracy. This is something that is important, like deeply important to Minnesota. This is the way that people get fair representation. And yes, I agreed with that. Absolutely, you're right. I'm used to the data user side of things, but no one can argue with those other things that are just as true and probably more exciting for a lot of folks than than the data. Although I know I've got my data friends out there too. So Bob said, what do you need? And I said, well, we need staff people to help organize it, and we need as many people, to get the word out. I didn't have a real firm sense of what this effort needed to look like, but I wanted to just kind of keep my mind open to the possibilities. And I think, along the way, just more and more people kind of joined the effort, and it was really exciting to see how much passion there was around it, because usually you don't hear census and think like passion, but it was about civic engagement. It's about democracy. It was about fairness and equity, and all those things. People really kind of found a home in this effort. And so I was along for the ride, and to help out any way that I could figure out how to help out.
Yeah. And what a wonderful effort. I came on board, through Huda and Grassroots, as part of the co-creators table. And then eventually, I was fortunate enough. Oh, I lost your. Okay, there you go.
Sorry,
Maybe
my
for a little
daughter
bit.
called in.
Oh yeah, no problem.
I got rid of her.
But yeah, I was fortunate enough to move into that coordinator role. As Bob was retiring, and help with um, the coordination, and then the coordinating team, and some of the other outreach and engagement of all of our wonderful organizations that we were able to get on board as the co-creators. But then also later on, in terms of like engagement, when we started the hubs and really like got into the gritty work of doing the engagement across the state. And just FYI, if any of y'all are interested, you can I think still check that report out at www.mcmp2020.org. And so I believe that website is still up with our report. But I wanted to move towards the end and really talk about the number 26 and the fact that Minnesota kept our 8th congressional seat by 26 people. And I think the flip side of that was that like New York was like 89 or something like that. If they would have counted 89 more, if we would have counted 26 less or something like that. But there's like an equation.
Yep.
You can talk about that a little bit too. But the like some of the talking points that we were telling people to get them motivated was that we wanted to keep our 8th, right? Because with our 8th meant funding, federal dollars, representation, political leverage. I mean, all of those great democratic talking points that usually are reserved for voting, right? And obviously everyone knows that the slogan for voting is that your vote counts, right? Like go vote because it makes a difference. And so we are now starting to build that passion, that connection to being counted. And that just our story, our 2020 census story just totally proves that everybody does count. Because again, we kept our 8th congressional seat by 26 people. So why don't you, I would love for you to elaborate on that in terms of what what you felt, and like what that meant, in your mind when you first learned about that.
Sure. So a couple of different thoughts occur to me about that. And one is just in response to the way that you described how people engaged with the effort. And I'll say that I was kind of just surprised and honored to watch what happened, because I think, it came at a time when for a lot of people, they felt under attack. And in fact, they were under attack by their own government. And so it was particularly hard to take a census during kind of the political atmosphere that existed at the time. And so I think that people could find a home and find a passion and find an interest in being counted and being visible at a time when it would have been much simpler to just disappear. But what they wanted was that visibility. They wanted to claim the power that was theirs. All those things were just so wonderful to watch. And so I guess just pointing out that it was during a time where you maybe wouldn't have expected that to happen as much. And so I would say that did not happen in every state. It maybe happened some other places. I know there were pockets around the US that had census nerds, census armies, that were excited and understood the power in the count. But I would say, Minnesota led the count in self-response, and we had so much engagement across so many different communities that helped us get to that high level of self-response. So about 3/4 of Minnesota households responded on their own without any additional prompting. And that maybe doesn't sound like a high number, but it is. It's the highest in the US of any state. And what that means is when people respond by themselves, their count is much more accurate. The data are much more accurate because you don't have, people making guesses about how many people are. I have a really loud cat right now. Sorry about
It's all
that.
good.
She's like, I want to talk about the census too. Sorry about that. You don't have
That's
people
great.
making guesses about how many people are in the house. People tell you themselves. The data are more accurate when people self-respond. So it helps us get a more accurate count, a better count, having that engagement and having that level of self-response. So, we knew it was going to be close. In 2010, we knew that we kept the last seat that was there to be doled out. It's the 435th congressional seat. Minnesota got that in 2010, the very last one, by about 8,000 people. And so I had been, telling everyone who would listen, well, it was so close. It was 8,000 people. Can you believe it? We barely held on to it. It was just 8,000 people. And now here we get the numbers back in 2020. And for us, our margin was 26 people. And so that was just kind of mind blowing that it could get even that close. The way that it works out is based on population size. States are ranked using a formula that ensures that no state that is given the next priority for the seat reduces the representation of anyone else. So it's a formula you actually need a spreadsheet to go in and do, but it's posted on the Census Bureau site if you want to dig in and see it. But that's why when we would leapfrog, when we leapfrogged in front of New York, we would not have done so with 26 fewer people. And then the formula is slightly different for New York, that they would have, that their margin was 76, I think, or 78. Maybe you remember it, but it was somewhere around 70 to 80 where
Okay.
yeah. So we kept these 8 seats, and I think it's particularly powerful for people in rural Minnesota because their districts are enormous. Ours are enormous too, but in terms of geography of these districts, I mean, they span almost the whole state. And had we lost a seat, we would have had to add 100,000 people to each district. And to get 100,000 people around greater Minnesota in some of these districts, you really have to stretch it a really far way to get that many people in the district. So I think just for practicality of having one person represent as small of an area as possible, this was a huge boost. It is for all of us, but I think especially for rural Minnesota where those districts are huge.
Yeah. And there's some expansion in the larger district, and then there would have been some constricting in the smaller, like more populous districts. Correct?
Yeah, so that's
Like
what's
in the
gonna,
metro.
yeah, that's what's happening during this redistricting cycle. So the district where Brooklyn Park is located, where you are, is the 3rd congressional district. That grew the most. It grew by about 75,000 people. And that is more than kind of the average amount of growth because it was at the top of the list for growth. So that district will need to shrink in geographic size to keep the same number of people as the other districts. All of the districts grew over the last decade, but the 3rd district just led the growth.
Yeah, and that's a great segue. Perfect segue. So but before we jump into Brooklyn Park,
Yeah.
wearing my t-shirt. Let's give everyone a overview, some top numbers in terms of Minnesota and the 2020 census data. For for Minnesota, and what that means. Kind of like moving into the next few years here.
Sure. So what I will say is what we have out of the 2020 census so far is just what's called the redistricting file. So it's not, we'll get more data next year in 2022, more detailed data about race, age, and some other things. But for right now, we have basic race groups, we have population totals, and a few other items, but we don't have detailed age or things like that. It's just kind of basic stuff that's needed for the redistricting process. And what we learned out of there is that we grew by 7.6% over the course of the decade, which is just about the national average. So most Midwestern states didn't grow as quickly as we did. But there are states in the southern part of the US and the western part of the US that grew much more rapidly than we did. That's just part of how the US has been growing in recent decades, and that's continued into 2020. So we added about 402,000 people over, that's what our 7.6 percentage was. It's 402,000 people that were added. So our population is now just over 5.7 million. And what happened for the first time in a census is that our white non-Hispanic population began to decline. Now this has been a long time coming, and it's been something that we've noticed, you know, first among the school-age population, and then among the working-age population, and now for the population overall, that we see a small decline. In the white non-Hispanic population, it declined by about 50,000 people between 2010 and 2020. And that's just because the white population is older. They're not having as many children because they're in those older ages, and they are in high mortality age groups, which is my very sterile way of saying they are passing away. So that's just the reality of these demographics, that it's really hard to grow when you have an older population, and the white non-Hispanic population in Minnesota is older. So what grew were populations of color across the state, and really all populations of color, if you're looking statewide, grew. The Black or African American population slightly outpaced the other groups, but you know, there was strong growth in the Hispanic or Latino, in the Asian population, you know, and then among people of mixed race, of two or more races. So we saw increasing diversity this decade, and for the first time we saw that white population begin to decline. Again, it's just natural life and death kind of stuff. People usually, they think right to migration when we start talking about population change. Who left and who's coming here? It's maybe has a little bit to do with that, but mostly it's just about who's already here and how old are they. So those are kind of like, that's kind of the high level of how we're changing with respect to race, how we grew as a state. Again, we didn't hold on to that 8th congressional seat because we've been growing like crazy. We've been pretty much the average in the US in terms of growth, but we held on to it just because we just were at that tipping point of that 435th seat. So it was a very close call. I guess the only other thing that I would point out is that most of the growth that happened in the last decade happened in the Twin Cities metropolitan area. The 7 counties of the metropolitan area accounted for 78% of the growth in the state. So that's a tremendous amount of growth. The Twin Cities has always kind of been, not always, but in recent decades has been outpacing other areas of the state, but that really picked up. It was kind of supersized this time, or like, you know, on steroids, that growth in the 7 county metro area. Hennepin County alone added 129,000 people. And remember, the whole state added 402,000 people. So, you know, fully a quarter, more than a quarter of the state's growth was just in Hennepin County alone. So very concentrated growth this time, particularly in the Twin Cities metro.
Yeah. Wow. That's really important. You know, I mean, there's been, you know, articles around housing, the housing crisis, there's news, just around like diversity and equity issues, obviously. But to see that much concentration in growth, and then to know that we're talking about just uh, having it be um, um, what was it, affecting the third district, and that obviously because it's above average, then it will have to constrict a little bit. Um, that uh, that means redistricting, and I think that process is starting to come into more focus now. But yeah, what are some of the trends then you're seeing in terms of um, you know what that means for local communities such as Brooklyn Park, and Brooklyn Center. Obviously we have the most diversity in in the state, I would say. I mean, I think there is one other city that has like 64%, people of color living in there. But we're Brooklyn Park, Brooklyn Center, we're at maybe 52, 54. But in terms of like just the diversity of our diversity, from
Hmm.
API communities to African, to Latinx, across the board, such a diverse community. So we are part of Hennepin County. We are a part of that third district. That's going to have to constrict. Yeah. So what are your insights in terms of Brooklyn Park and our area?
Yeah, so looking at Brooklyn Park, it just kept right up with those trends. I looked up the growth right before we were talking because I wanted to be able to be sure to tell you. So the city grew between 2010 and 2020 from 75,781 people to 86,478 was its count. So it grew by about 10,700 people over the decade, which is a whopping 14.1% growth. So that's double what the state's growth was. So it was one of those fast growing areas. And then if we look, group by group, at the growth of different race groups, it really is very closely mirroring that trend that I just described for the state overall. So you see a slight decline in the white non-Hispanic residents of Brooklyn Park, and you see growth in all those other areas. So again, this is kind of that natural playing out of our demographics. There might be, movement in and out that helps the trend one way or helps it the other way. But in general, this is just kind of the playing out of us being here and aging. So at the 2020 census, about 53,000, it's 52,894 of Brooklyn Park's residents self-identified as people of color. That's 61%. So really quite a big boost over that decade. I didn't go through and rank all the cities, so I don't know. I think it was either St. James. It's or I'm not sure what the other city is. It's in Greater Minnesota that kind of hovers around Brooklyn Park and Brooklyn Center in terms of percent of the population that is part of a BIPOC community. But you're right. It's right up there with the very few cities that have kind of reached that point where the majority of the residents belong to a BIPOC community.
And Susan, I was wondering if you could share any other data trends in terms of our aging population. So I know, part of the census data is that we are aging. We are having an aging population. I mean, we also know that in Brooklyn Park, we're actually trying to become a more age-friendly city. So, what are some insights in terms of the aging population, that um, will affect or influence, our area, in the coming years?
Yeah. So I think there's a lot of changes that are going on, that are being brought on by the aging trend. I can't point to the specific numbers just yet about the population of older adults in Brooklyn Park or even in the state. We have some surveys that give us some idea, but those 2020 numbers haven't been released. We only have 18 and above and 0 to 17 as age groups. So two big age groups just centered around voting age really is why we have those. But absolutely, we know that the state is aging and that there are more people moving into those older years. And so there are all kinds of things that it's impacting right now that we can see and feel and understand. In part, we have housing issues because this huge baby boom generation still is oftentimes moving out of their home, but many are still in, occupying homes that might be larger than what they would otherwise choose as the size of the household. And so we may have this mismatch for a little while between the housing that we have and the availability of housing. Where we're feeling the aging trend right now really is in the job market, in the ability for employers to find workers. And that's been really something that's been building up until the pandemic. It kind of went away for a brief blink while the pandemic took center stage, but we're kind of right back to where we were, with the number of job openings outpacing the number of people looking for work. And that's the impact of aging, because baby boomers are leaving their jobs, and it's leaving openings for lots and lots of folks, which of course is a good thing if you are someone who's looking for work. Not such a great thing if you're an employer and are struggling to find workers. But that's one more kind of thing that we can draw a direct connection between aging and what we're seeing right now in the workplace. Moving forward, and even beginning now, thinking about how we make our communities appropriate for all life stages, that they're not just built for kids, they're not just built for young people, but they're for all of us all the way through. That's something that is really going to be increasingly important as that huge generation of baby boomers begins moving into their older years. And that's kind of what we're right on the cusp of moving into at this point.
Yeah, that's really great. Susan, I'm gonna ask you to kind of do the same thing, and maybe here, I know you're in your capacity as a state demographer, but I'm sure at the state you've maybe are seeing other works, other projects around diversity and equity, inclusion projects. What do you see, maybe in the data, but also connecting to other trends in the state, in terms of what the city can do to help the population growth, the demographic growth, to really take advantage of the coming years, in terms of the economy, right? You mentioned a little bit about the difficulties that the aging population is facing, and the businesses are facing. We're trying to promote African immigrant work connections and business support, because obviously we have a large African immigrant population here, a big number of Liberians, Nigerians, and other populations. So yes, so what are some of your insights in terms of the the diversity, and where the city or the area can go in terms of its development?
Yeah, so I think one thing that I know is important for cities and for school districts is that they understand their kind of symbiotic relationship. And I am saying this knowing absolutely nothing about the relationship between the Brooklyn Park schools and the Brooklyn. So I'm just coming to this very, very generically. This is absolutely not a comment on anything that's going on in your specific situation there in Brooklyn Park, but it is to say that I know that housing patterns develop around school systems and strong school systems. And so I would say, you know, one aspect of strong growth for a city and even economic health of a city is to have that relationship in place and to have good, healthy schools that people want to send their kids to. With the increase in diversity and with some of the need for workers that we have now and that we'll have in the future, the disparities in outcomes in education are particularly concerning. And so I would say that, you know, even though the city may not wade into some of those issues around equitable outcomes in education, I think it's very much tied up into the health of the city. And so kind of finding ways, and I don't know what those ways are, but finding ways that the city can support the schools and the schools can support the city, I think is something that seems really important to me. Just knowing how people move and how cities grow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No,
So I don't know.
no, that's a really great insight. It actually touches upon some, a couple of local issues. Like for one, it makes me go right to the fact that Brooklyn Park, the city of Brooklyn Park, is divided among three different school districts.
Okay.
Yeah, the big one is Osseo, but we have in the northeast Anoka Hennepin, and then in the southwest Robbinsdale. So
Okay.
yeah, so the connection between like the community and the school boards and like the city of Brooklyn Park, that's definitely been a conversation,
Mm-hmm.
for a while. And so yeah, I wasn't even thinking of that when I was asking the question, but as soon as you said schools and city relationship, I was like, wow, yes, that makes so much sense. It does. And then sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. I think you had something else on your mind.
Well, that was what came to mind first was just the issue of that relationship. Yeah, I think that was kind of
Okay.
my main thought on that.
Yeah, no, that's great. So yeah, and those conversations will continue. I think Osseo and Hennepin County, Hennepin, Anoka Hennepin schools, their districts are, I think, two of like the largest, in
Mm-hmm.
the state. So they're huge. I mean, I think Hennepin County, I can't say Hennepin, Anoka Hennepin, covers a lot of the North Metro, and then
Yeah.
Osseo, like Northwest, I think covers Maple Grove and maybe even some further and down to Plymouth. So yeah, really two big school districts that we continue to have conversations with. So yeah, that's great. Transitioning a little bit into um, what we can do now, right? For redistricting, right? Um, what are what are some of your insights into what's happening right now with redistricting? I know there's some organizations in the works trying to help get people to go to hearings, trying to build communities of interest. What are your thoughts on our redistricting process so far?
So I can describe it a little bit and then just kind of note some observations. So I've been involved in some of the House redistricting hearings, and my role is just to kind of say how those districts have changed, and note kind of any things that people should pay attention to in the data. Um, many of the districts that I spoke about sounded like what we talked about here today in terms of growth, that there were strong growth in the urban districts, increasing diversity, decline in the white non-Hispanic population. These are trends that kind of fit for most districts, congressional districts anyway, across the board. And so what the House did was have a series of hearings where, I'd present that information and then people would come on and give feedback about what they wanted to see. And some people's feedback was very specific. They said, we should be put with this city, or we should be kept away from the city, or, whatever it was. They had very specific kind of idea. This is one category of feedback was, we are very much like cities to our east, for example, and not to our west or something. They gave specific feedback like that. But I'd say the biggest kind of category of feedback was, please don't split us up into multiple either congressional or state legislative districts. Please keep us whole, because elections are confusing, and because we have a common interest as a city or as a county or as a, whatever the entity was. People asked to be kept whole. And I appreciate that absolutely from the perspective of those who are administering elections and from those who are, building community. The problem, I'll just throw out here what one of my thoughts I was thinking while this was happening was, every time you shift a border to draw these maps, you're affecting other sections of the map. And so, every time a district shifts, you're shifting one or more districts in another place. And it leaves it very, very difficult not to split up some community somewhere. So to me, it sounds like the committee was being very receptive and being very careful to take in that feedback. And they were glad to hear those places that were being split up that shouldn't be split up. But just knowing kind of that, this isn't a puzzle that has probably not even just one solution. It has millions of solutions, but it doesn't have like that final puzzle piece where you can put in that last whole city and ding, you've solved. I don't think it has that. Maybe it does. It would be very, very hard to find, I think, where you would keep all cities whole, all counties whole, all communities whole. The very process of redistricting itself is to make split somewhere. And so I'm not saying that, that any action should or will come of that feedback. I totally get the feedback, but I just want to kind of contextualize or point out what a difficult task that is to keep all communities whole when you've got all of the state in front of you and your job is making dividing lines. So it's really complicated.
I can imagine, as a geek and as someone kind of who looked into some of the redistricting information, I learned that there is a little bit of a I don't know about movement, but there are some options to have artificial intelligence and computers, kind of help draw these districts, right? If you have certain inputs and everything. Mm-hmm. So that was really interesting and kind of fun for me to be like, oh, okay, like AI, it's like the wave of the future, so maybe we can, lean on some AI to help find that final piece or something.
Yeah, maybe. Maybe it could find that solution. No, I don't think it even could, because you've got to think about all the different levels of geography too. If you were just looking at one level of geography, maybe, but you're not just looking at cities, you're also looking at counties, you're also looking at, all the political districts. Man, it's complicated work. So I guess that was one category of feedback that I would say, yes, I get where you're coming from, but it's going to be hard. someone's
Yeah,
probably gonna have to make do with being split up in some way.
a little
Um,
bit. Yeah. So here's a comment from C. Lee about the schools. Do the districts that the Brooklyn Park schools fall under reflect the same kind of growth as Brooklyn Park itself? And I'm assuming the city. So I'm not sure if you have any data on like the school districts.
I don't have it at the school district level, but hang on one second, and I will look to tell you some of the cities around you that have grown as well. Um,
Yeah, that's a good question. Trying to draw correlations between the school districts and the cities.
yeah.
Again, yeah, our Brooklyn Park's main, probably like the biggest chunk or a majority, probably like 80%, I think, of the city is in the Osseo School District. So then the other 10 are split up into Anoka, Hennepin,
Hmm.
and Robbinsdale.
Okay. So I'm looking kind of at the top list of cities in terms of numeric growth, and that's where Brooklyn Park is 7th in terms of all the cities that grew the most with that growth of just over 10,000. Plymouth and Maple Grove are 8 and 9. So just in your same neighborhood. Plymouth is a little bit further, but in that same set of big school districts, considerable growth there as well.
Yeah, that's good to know. So, I mean, I think Maple Grove and Plymouth, parts of it fall into the Osseo School District. So we could reasonably say, the Osseo School District is probably trending along the same lines. Um, I mean, definitely not as much as the city, our city itself, but along the same trends. Okay.
Yeah. And if you're really interested, I think we have those posted on our site, the school districts. I just don't happen to have them in my head or in front of me. So,
Sure. And what do you know the website?
so we're mn.gov/demography. And we've got a scroller feature off the front page, the homepage of our site, that is showing new census data. And I think we have school districts posted right along with cities and counties and.
Awesome.
Excuse me.
Yeah. So check out that website. I just dropped it in the chat. Yeah, a lot of other great information there too, and information that goes back. Like how far does the information go back?
So our office was formed in the early 70s, and so I'm not sure that we have all our reports going back to the 70s, but I know we have reports from even the 90s and the 2000s and the 2010s. If you want to look back at Minnesota's demographic history, you sure can do it through our reports.
Awesome. And Susan, like the one thing I definitely wanted to talk to you about, before we end tonight was just your position and the career path that you've chosen. I think for a lot of our younger generation, young adults, youth, kids, becoming a state demographer may not be up there with some of the more popular jobs. So what brought you into that, as a young person, and how do our young people nowadays, how can they break in and get into this data demography field?
Yeah, so there's all kinds of jobs now that are kind of like cousins to demographers. I wasn't a young person when I got into it. I think I was 30 when I figured out that I wanted to be a demographer. So I had started out as an undergrad in social work. Generally just wanted to help people, but didn't quite know how. And then I moved into public policy after that. And it was when I was getting a master's degree in public policy that I figured out I liked demography. And at that time, I was almost 30. I went on to more school after that. But there are schools, and there's even one in Minnesota that trains demographers, population study centers, they're called. So there's probably about 15 to 20 of them around the US, and they're usually around, major universities. So that was how I came to do it, just lots and lots of school. For young people that want to get into it, the reason why I was drawn into it is because it lets you see kind of invisible features that are shaping our everyday lives that we don't often think about. So for me, it was kind of like uncovering a mystery, and it still is. I mean, looking at some of the data, it's things you can't always see with your eyeballs, but once you see it in the data, it just makes perfect sense to you, and you can kind of chart a path ahead because you know where these trends are going. They really move very, very slowly. The aging trend, for example, we've seen this coming since, after World War II, when the baby boomers were booming. These are trends that are now just kind of unfolding and making their way into our everyday lives in different ways. And so for me, that's what drew it to me, was just being able to kind of see the invisible. And if people are interested in fields like this one, there's demography. There's also, all kinds of data science and analytics and things that businesses use, that nonprofits use, that grant makers use, that governments use. It's one of those things that if you pick up data analysis or you pick up some kind of analytic field, the applications are really kind of very, very broad. And so you can kind of hop around to whatever it is that you end up liking. Demography is good too. You can be a state demographer if you want to too, but there's lots of other things you can be with the same skill set.
Yeah. And what kind of maybe you can list one personality trait. I love that you talked about like seeing the invisible, things that affect our, processes, but maybe a personality trait of yours that has helped you through your career.
Huh. I guess I'm just interested in puzzles, and I like kind of building an analysis that solves a puzzle, if that makes sense. So
Yeah.
you've got, a big pile of data. It doesn't mean much, and you want to ask it a question. And you've got to do some very detail oriented, very thoughtful, planned things in order to ask it a good question, or at least you can ask it a good question, but you'll get kind of a lousy answer if you're not careful and detail oriented and all those things. So I would say, having that kind of built into me about being careful and detail oriented and curious about, what might be in that big old pile of data are things that kind of lead me to this work and keep me kind of going. I love being able to do that actual data analysis work.
So you're saying you're looking for trouble in those data piles.
Yeah. Or looking for good news. I don't know.
Good news. Yeah. You're looking for those big data piles to jump into. That's awesome. Yeah. Thanks Lo for your comments. Yeah, great. And yeah, that wraps us up. Thank you everyone for joining. Thank you so much, Susan, for giving us a little bit of your time tonight.
Thanks for having me.
It was a really, really great conversation. Thanks for all the information on the census data, as well as kind of more local information. And again, check out the website. So we have Susan here tonight, but the website is always there. You could go on even later tonight, when you're up in 1 or 2 in the morning, just kind of looking for stuff to do on the internet. Check out the demographer's website.
You can jump into your big old data pile yourself from our website.
Yes.
I promise.
Yes. There's a lot of data there. So yeah, any last thoughts, Susan?
Thanks so much for having me. It was great to see you, XP.
Yeah, really, really great to see you again too. So take care. Have a good night, and everyone, continue to please be safe and we'll see you next time. See ya.
Bye-bye.
Bye.